Priscilla is directed by Sofia Coppola, whose directed works I have not seen, but I did see her in Godfather Part 3. I hear her directed works are much better. And is about how teenager Priscilla falls head over heels for rock star Elvis Presley, but soon discovers the price of fame and what that does to someone even in their most private moments. I'm sure a lot of people are going to make the argument that this movie is clearly trying to springboard off of last year's Elvis movie, but in all honesty, when you sit down and watch the movie, the two films couldn't be more different except for the fact that they have relatively the same characters. And I mean that as in, whereas Elvis is more of a larger-than-life showcase of Elvis's best and some of his worst moments, Priscilla is more down-to-earth and shows what the rock star really was like in his private moments with her, and it is slightly uncomfortable, and it will make some Elvis fans very angry. I love Elvis, don't get me wrong, but no one was perfect, and he was far from perfect. And this movie shows just how far from perfect he was, just how human he was, just how human Priscilla was, and because of all of that, I really enjoyed this movie. Let's go on about the acting in this movie, because I'm pretty sure that's what most people are very interested to see. Kaylee Spaney as Priscilla in this film is fantastic. You see her grow up from a young teenager to a mother in the span of about 2 hours, and you really do buy that transformation. Not only that, but in those little moments when she is the only person on screen and she has to react to something that she saw Elvis do or something that she saw in the paper, those little reactions on her face are probably the best pieces of acting in the entire movie. But while Priscilla is the main character of the film, let's be honest, we all want to know how Jacob Elordi does as Elvis Presley, especially after the Oscar-nominated portrayal that Austin Butler gave us. And if I'm being completely honest, while I don't think it is nearly as good as Butler's performance, it's still a pretty good performance nonetheless. While I don't think he looks like Presley, he sounds exactly like him. And when he's interacting with Priscilla and you see his very charming sides, but also his darker sides, it's so believable and it's just so engaging because it's something we've never seen before, and we'll get into more of that in a minute. And the two actors really do have fantastic chemistry with each other. You buy into their romance so much that during those scenes, you do have a smile on your face, but it's also believable enough chemistry that when they blow up at each other, you completely buy that because you buy that they are two people who love each other, but at the same time, clearly have a lot of problems. I also loved the look of this movie and the contrast between Priscilla's old life and her new life when she goes to Graceland. In her old life, the color palette makes a lot of use of these flat images and a lot of browns to make it just look as unappealing as possible. But when she goes to Graceland and whenever she is with Elvis, especially in the first half of this movie, all of the curtains are so see-through that even though it's not the most colorful, it always gives this impression when the sun is bleeding in that she is in this magical escape. And as the movie goes on, that contrast bleeds together when she is married to Elvis and she goes through both her great times and her worst times. And that's probably the best thing about this movie. We get to see a ton of insight into the lives of Elvis and Priscilla, even when it is not the most flattering image. This movie is not afraid to show just how manipulative and controlling Elvis could really be with his treatment of Priscilla. And you get this feeling that in his heart of hearts, he really does love her, but at the same time, you also just see how emotionally abusive he could be. It's not a portrayal that you see too often, and it's a portrayal that this movie decided to omit entirely. I also loved seeing how Priscilla had to adapt to her new world of fame. Like, in the first half of the movie, you see just how restrictive she was to Graceland's property. She was not allowed to invite anyone over from school. She was not allowed to play outside in fear of being seen doing something wrong. And you see how she has to adapt to her new setting both physically and emotionally. Like, there's one part in the movie when her daughter is being born, and while everyone around the house is running like mad, Priscilla is just calmly putting on makeup because she knows there will be a ton of camera people surrounding the hospital. There are tons of little moments like that that really do show the change she goes through throughout the film. As for flaws with the film, I really only have one big flaw. With that said, it is a huge flaw, and that is the pacing. The pacing throughout this entire movie is all over the place. In the first half of the movie, when Priscilla spends by far the most time with her parents, it feels so rushed. In the first 5 minutes of the movie, she is immediately invited to Elvis's house and goes to meet him with only just a small sliver of interaction between her and her parents. And that's essentially how the entire first half of this movie goes. Any trouble that Priscilla comes across in the movie is essentially immediately solved within like 2 minutes max. So the first half feels completely and utterly tensionless, which was probably the worst part of this entire movie because you barely got to see any of the family, and knowing this story after seeing it, in reality there was more familial tension with Priscilla's family than what they showed. And to skip a good majority of that in favor of getting to Graceland as quickly as possible just got under my skin. And the last half of the movie is the exact opposite problem. It feels so long and it feels like it goes on forever because there's not a lot of tension in this film. There are quick scenes of tension in the film, but no overall tension to make you feel like Priscilla needs to get out of this relationship as quickly as possible. It's just a bunch of nice moment, awful moment, nice moment, awful moment, nice moment, awful moment, to the point where we get to the apparent climax of the film, it feels like just another one of those good moment, awful moments. Literally, when the movie ends, I thought the movie still had a good 20 or 15 minutes left, but then the screen faded to black, the house lights went up, and the credits started rolling, and I was just left in my seats like, that's it? Even though there are plenty of intense scenes, there's a lack of intensity throughout the entirety of the film, and that's by far the biggest problem and the biggest hindrance of the film. Don't get me wrong, am I recommending this movie? Yes, and I really am because the good stuff is just that good. The acting and chemistry is fantastic, the visuals are gorgeous, and the insight into the two main characters makes the movie all worthwhile. But the pacing throughout the film is all over the place, and while individual scenes are tension-filled, the movie as a whole lacks intensity. While I don't love this film, I do feel like the people who wanted the more gritty insight into Elvis's life that was missing from the 2022 film will more than get that in this movie. I'm gonna give Priscilla a B. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are the best, and don't forget to click subscribe and click that bell icon down below to stay up to date on all things movie, all things TV, all things nerd.